Hi everybody, Andrew Cuneo here. Today I'm going to attempt to answer the question, just how crafty is Sam Black? This is Sam's build of blue-white control that he played in the Arena Open. I covered this deck a little bit in a previous video where I was comparing my build of Esper control to some other builds of Esper and blue-white control. And this was a deck that stood out to me just because it was so different from how I would normally look to build a control deck. The way that it's really different is it's got these 11 cheap creatures in it, which that's something I would usually shy away from putting in a control deck, but Sam has got a lot of them. Kind of wanted to see what's going on there. The most interesting one to me is the Clone Crafter, which is it could be a really powerful card if you're making very good use of the 1/2 body. If you're not making good use of the 1/2 body, obviously this could just be a different creature. It could be a Leer, it could be another Hullbreaker Horror, it could be a different spell. So you have to, in order for Clone Crafter to be good, you both have to be able to make use of the creature that it finds from your opponent's deck, and you also need to be able to make some use of the 1/2 body. The way this deck attempts to make use of the 1/2 body is divide by 0, so bounce it back to your hand, play it again, get a second creature from your opponent's deck. Or Divine Purge, which hopefully you're using to get some of your opponent's stuff off the board, but you're also going to get your Clone Crafter off the board, and then you could recast it later on in the game and gain some more advantage like that. When I posted my original video, Sam responded that looping Clone Crafters or just playing them repeatedly and getting Leers and Hullbreaker Horrors was really good in control mirrors because you just wind up with so many copies of Leer and Hullbreaker Horror. So we'll have to see how that plays out getting into some games. The other small creature is the Geistchanneler. I moved away from putting Geistchanneler into blue spell decks when I became convinced that Key to the Archive was just the best thing to be doing, because Key to the Archive's casting cost is not reduced by Geistchanneler, and there's just a limit to how many expensive cards you can put in a deck. So it's kind of it's a real tragedy if you have a turn 2 Geistchanneler and you wind up not playing it because you don't have a spell that you can reduce the cost of in your hand. And that's going to happen more often if your expensive cards are all Key to the Archives. The way Sam has gotten around that is 6 copies of these expensive double-faced cards, Emeria's Call and Seagate Restoration. Generally, I hate Seagate Restoration as a card, but if you're making it cost 2 less to cast, I think that goes a long way to addressing the main issues I have with the card, which is that in a control deck, by the time you're actually getting to play this, you're either almost definitely going to win, or you're so far behind that it's not going to do anything. So we'll see if Seagate Restoration in conjunction with the Geistchanneler actually leads to winning some games. Outside of that, this is also a Witness the Future deck, which I think is a really cool idea for sure, especially in a deck that's going to reduce the casting cost permanently of so many of its cards. So Geistchanneler is doing that. Discover the Formula is doing that. You're eventually going to build an incredible late game with this deck where you shuffled in a bunch of good cards that you've also reduced the casting cost of. So later on in the game, you're going to have some really, really busted turns where you're able to play a Discover the Formula that's been discounted, 2 or more mana. And then you're going to be getting cards that are going to be extremely discounted, both by the Discover you're casting, and they could have previously been discounted and shuffled back into your deck with Witness the Future. So this deck has an incredible late game. I would say, honestly, that it's kind of aiming for too much of a late game. You're really just kind of piling on in the spots where you've probably already won at that point. But I want to give it a try. I'm interested in playing control decks that don't have Leer because I think there's a decent chance Leer's going to get nerfed on the upcoming week when they announce the new Alchemy changes. That's the main deck. I went over it in some more detail in the previous video, like I said. If you're interested, go and watch that. Sam's deck list that he posted online was a best of 1 deck list, so the sideboard was just 7 lessons to go and get with divide by 0. I've converted it to a best of 3 deck list. So I've trimmed the lessons down. There's now 1 copy of Environmental Sciences, 1 copy of Teachings of the Archaics, 1 copy of Mascot Exhibition. That's completely typical for any divide by 0 deck. There's also one copy of Reduced to Memory, which in the past I haven't always played when I was playing Blue-White Control. I'm going to see if there's some reason to be playing it, so I'm going to still have one copy. I think that's kind of a flex slot. If you're looking to make more room in the sideboard, you could maybe get rid of that. What I have added is 4 copies of Ray of Frost, primarily to answer dragons, because I think Townraiser Tyrant's a very important card to have an answer to, and obviously Divine Purge doesn't work against it. For the same reason, some Disdainful Strokes. They also do double duty against Key to the Archive decks. Malevolent Hermits. I think that Malevolent Hermit is one of the best ways to actually gain an advantage from your sideboard if you're playing a Key to the Archive mirror. A lot of the cards that people board in, whether they're Disdainful Strokes or Go Blanks, those are cards that they work fine. They're good sideboard cards, but you never really feel like you're able to actually gain it, to get ahead. And I think with Blue-White in particular, when you're playing potentially against an Esper deck, the Esper decks are inherently going to have better late game than you usually in the sideboarding games because they're going to have Go Blank. So you need to be looking to actually get ahead at the start of the game. And I think Malevolent Hermit is the one card that does that. That's why I've got so many copies of it. Then a Doomscar and Negate, which I think are just kind of standard sideboard cards. I wanted the Doomscar in particular because I wanted to have an additional sweeper in matchups where I didn't like Divine Purge. So that's the deck. Let's go ahead and see how it performs in some games. All right, this is kind of what my deck is looking to do. I've got a Geistchanneler. I'm going to make a cheap Discover the Formula. So I potentially can make a cheap Seagate Restoration as well. I guess I'll just start with, well, if I put this, what color did they choose? They chose green, so I maybe need to be able to cast Divine Purge. All right, we'll just start with a Deserted Beach then. I might have to forego the Scry on the Forsaken Crossroads. Depending on what I draw next turn, I might wind up discounting the Seagate Restoration, or I might feel that I need to play the Seagate Restoration as a land. I think if I don't draw a land, I'm going to want to play Seagate Restoration as a land. Actually, I'm going to want to discard Seagate Restoration. So I could play the Clone Crafter this turn. That would, the one thing that's maybe more appealing though is to actually just Field of Ruin this land. That way I can play the Clone Crafter on white, or I can play the Forsaken Crossroads on white. I can Field of Ruin their Hive of the Eye Tyrant to get double blue. That way I have double blue, double white, and if I draw my 4th land, I can play Discover the Formula, and I don't have to worry about whether I set this on white or blue. This way, either color works fine as long as I draw a 4th land. I don't know if my opponent's thinking about if they want to sack their blood. There's really, unless they really want to draw a basic land, you wouldn't want to use your blood right now. I suppose they could have Infernal Grasp and be thinking about killing the Geistchanneler. I hope they don't have any basic lands in their deck. That seems extremely unlikely, but somehow it was true. Wow. All right, sadly I did not draw a land. I guess maybe at last turn I was supposed to play the Geistchanneler and just make the Discover the Formula cost 2. I didn't think about doing that. So they got red mana, which they have to be playing a 3-color deck if they have no basic lands in their deck. Well, this attack didn't really make any sense at all. Did that because I was really hoping to hit Emeria's, whatever the Emeria land is called, or a Seagate Restoration, so that I would be able to make my land drop that turn. Alright, so they're a Jund deck. Makes sense. This is going to be a pretty good turn for Divine Purge. I think I'm going to just chump this, even though I would be able to recast my Geistchanneler later on in the game. I don't think I'm ever going to have enough mana that I really want to bother with doing that. Well, this does give me a way to get mana. I think I want this D-Spark. I think the thing that I'm most scared about out of their deck is something like an Immerstorm Predator. Maybe another City Stalker Connoisseur. Just something I can't Divine Purge. Obviously, I have, well, like I said, I don't have really a weak spot. I'll just go ahead and take that. Do I want to divide by 0 this thing? I think I do. I think I'm going to divide by 0 this. Go and get Environmental Sciences. Sack my land. D-Spark this. And I'm going on offense. I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm going to wind up replaying Clone Crafters off of Divine Purge. I also have the Skyclave Apparition that can insert an Emberstorm Predator. Alright, let's see what hits Florian brings. An uncastable Key to the Archive, sadly. Florian's at least a good blocker. I'll just discard this. Sure, I'll just play all my cards. I have played in a way that if they actually have an Emberstorm Predator, it's going to be a little scary for me. That was perhaps a mistake on my part. Well, this is fun, at least. I've never connected with Florian before and been able to go and get Seagate Restoration. I also drew my second Field of Ruin against someone who's not playing basic lands. So I'm thinking that's going to be pretty good. I suppose I really don't want to take unnecessary damage. Does fielding them this turn do anything? I can cut them off with double red. My deck has another island in it. It does not. So I can't play the Geistchanneler this turn to make something cost less. Oh, I have no maximum hand size because of Seagate Restoration. Check it out. Maximum hand size infinite. Somehow I still haven't seen a Witness the Future. Everybody please sack 13. Should I play around Infernal Grasp in some way? Let's not bother. Let's just go for maximum fun. Okay. I don't think that keeping their Lotus Cobra in play for a turn is going to be the thing that breaks me. Guess I should leave Divide by Zero up. Build a discount Divide by Zero. Also, I could have killed them with the Hall of Storm Giants this turn. Forgot I had that one. It's honestly probably not even right to try to attack with the Hall of Storm Giants. If I just leave my mana untapped so I can play all these Divide by Zeros, they can't possibly win. Whereas, if I attack with the Hall of Storm Giants and it turns out they have some removal spell that causes them to live, they can maybe top deck something that starts to turn the game around. All right. That was pretty fun. I think I should board in Ray of Frost just because I really think they probably have some Emberstorm Predators. I know they have Townraiser Tyrant. I know they have Halana. What don't I need? Should I try to win without Hullbreaker Horror? It's probably not a very good idea. Skyclave Apparition seemed kind of lackluster. Probably I don't need all these Fateful Absences. This is a deck where actually the Clone Crafter and the Geistchanneler both block pretty well in this matchup because they have Kalane, Prosperous Innkeeper, and Lotus Cobra. So my 2-drops all block their 2-drops, and I gain some advantage generally because they're going to get a treasure from their 2-drop maybe, but I'm going to get a bigger advantage, I would say. So that's a really nice way that my cards line up with theirs. All right, let's just give this a try. A little bit light on lands, but I do have these two, which are both castable, and these two, which are very likely to be castable. And given that I have a Geistchanneler, this card's really not out of reach either. This is one that Sam said he was playing instead of Doomscar just because sometimes it would allow him to keep his own creatures. And that's true, but I think it's probably a better idea just to play with Doomscar. Do I just want to make my divide by 0 cheaper? Probably the safer play. One thing this does do, in addition to allowing you to save your own creatures, is you can kill creatures like Immerstorm Predator with it, which that's a pretty big deal. I'll forgo the scry in the interests of casting a Clone Crafter this turn. My very own Halana. Funnily, this is a way to make sure the Clone Crafter is relevant. You just start buffing it up with Halana. Yeah, I guess that's worth dividing. Unfortunately, they didn't sack their treasure, so I didn't get that little free bit of value. Now they're going to get my Discover the Formula. There's not really anything I can do about it. So I'll be forced to use my aggressive Clone Crafter strategy. This is much more of a beatdown draw than I really thought this deck was capable of. I'm going to go ahead and attack with the Geistchanneler here just because I thought they might want to chump the 4/4. Obviously, they should have, at a minimum, had Kalain block 1 point of damage. But if they have a second Kalain in their hand, or they just think that they need to chump some damage, I mean, the Kalain jump in front of the 4/4 is a pretty reasonable decision to make there, given what their hand might be. So I might be getting a free point of damage from the Geistchanneler. Holy cow! I would have been able to buy Invitation only them for lethal if they didn't take it. I'd like it very much if we each sack 2 creatures. That was a really weird way for a game to go. That's one of the fun things about playing Alchemy, though, is cards like Clone Crafter just lead to very unusual games. All right. I think this is still a keepable hand, but this is definitely an example of one of the awkward kinds of hands you get when you put Geistchanneler and Key to the Archive in your deck together. That's my 4th land. I'll definitely keep it. One of the things that it is nice about Key to the Archive is it's pretty hard to flood with it, just because you're always going to be able to convert a land into a spell if it resolves. What kind of a deck are they playing? It's a Lear deck. I've heard a lot of talk from people saying that they think Key to the Archive is probably the Alchemy card that needs to be nerfed the most. I would say I don't really agree with that. I think that Key to the Archive is a very good card, but it's also a card that is fairly it's fairly easy to interact with, because it can be abraded, it can be Prismari commanded. You can hit it with Skyclave Apparition. There's a lot of ways to attack an artifact in the format, and if it gets destroyed, the advantage of being able to change one card in your hand into a spell from the spellbook isn't really that big of an advantage, especially because a lot of the times you're going to wind up with a card that wouldn't even be castable when you make the exchange. We're going to try Sam's play of just firing off Leers. I think it's a pretty good play here. Add to the board. The one thing I think could be nerfed about Key to the Archive is I think they should remove Time Warp from the spellbook. I think Time Warp is by far the best card to get. I know some people don't like it when people get Approach of the Second Sun. I actually think in control decks, getting Approach of the Second Sun, it's making you lose more than you would otherwise lose the majority of the time. I think it's just not a good card to get in almost any scenario. Usually, the main effect having Approach in the key spellbook produces is that it allows the control decks to win games they were going to win anyway, but they just win them faster. It's a Hullbreaker Horror. Do you have Divide by 0? You probably do. I don't want to let them Doomscar away the Hullbreaker Horror, but I will let them Fateful Absence it or Divide by 0 it again. The main way to win these control matchups, honestly, is I think you just want to be spending more mana than your opponent is spending. I think once you get to the point where you're doing that, everything else gets pretty easy. Obviously, this is a game where my opponent missed their third land drop for a turn or two, and it's really hard to come back from that in these mirrors, just because it's so much of it is really just about getting to spend more mana than the other person. Right, so these are the 6 cards I think I want. Cards I don't think I want are pretty obviously I don't want Divine Purge, or by invitation only. I also don't really love the Fateful Absence of the Skyclave Apparition. Skyclave Apparition can hit Key to the Archive, which is something. Fateful Absence hits their Leers. They probably have Teferis or Hullbreaker Horrors as well. I think I'm going to cut 1 Fateful Absence. I kind of just threw this sideboard together, and now that I wind up boarding in this matchup the first time, I think I should probably have 1, maybe 2 more cards for this matchup and have a little bit less anti-creature stuff. This is one of the pinches that happens, though, when you play blue-white because of Divine Purge, where Divine Purge isn't a sweeper that is effective against it's not effective against Dragon's decks, really. So you wind up wanting to put other sweepers or other anti-creature cards in your sideboard because you need a way to upgrade the Divine Purges in the Dragons matchup, and that just winds up pinching your sideboard slots a lot, because you don't get to have creature removal that overlaps that well against dragons and kind of the werewolf or more aggressive creature decks. I'm sensing that my hand's going to soon have a Leer in it. Having a lot of clone crafters in your deck is pretty nice, given that it matches up well against Malevolent Hermit. Ooh, they have the Professor of Symbology in their deck. Wouldn't have guessed that. All right. I think it probably just doesn't even really matter which one of these I play. Do I want Reduced to Ashes or Teachings? Or Reduced to Memory, I guess is the name of it. I took Reduced to Memory just in case they have a Key to the Archive in their hand. The Fairy Who Slows the Sunset. That's a pretty good one. Wait, that's not what I want to do. I think I'm going to go Geistchanneler, reduce the cost on Reduced to Memory. Try to reduce the memory, the Teferi. And they'll either have to let the Teferi die, or they can counter with Malevolent Hermit, but I get to attack the Teferi for 2. And I'll have 3 creatures in play. Probably they're just going to let it die. We'll see. Hopefully they don't have a key here. Alright, they do have a key, so they're going to get to go key, untap it. At worst, they can just play a Malevolent Hermit. Might still be in okay shape, because I'll probably, if they just play the Malevolent Hermit, I'll Fateful Absence it to guarantee that I can kill the Teferi this turn. Alternately, I could also just play my own key to see what they do. If they have Divide by 0 in their hand, it's pretty awkward for me, because it means that they could have just left up Divide the Teferi back to my hand. Yeah. I could just let them trade the Professor of Symbology for the Benevolent Geist, or I guess they might just have just eat the Clone Crafter. Probably I don't need to use Fateful Absence on this Geist. I can just play my own key this turn. I want the mana. They're going to have access to a lot of mana. I'm hoping they don't really have any way to use it all that well. Let's see. So I could blow up their key. It seems fine. This is a play I like making a lot when you play these mirrors. The Malevolent Hermit, casting it on its front side is really good early on in the game. But the game does get to a point where casting it on its front side isn't really that great. And if you just discard it to the key, you get to play it on its backside. And the backside, there aren't that many counters in these matchups, but there are usually at least a few. So if you have a Benevolent Geist in play, it does shut off all your opponent's Disdainful Strokes, Negates, cards like that. If they get Counterspell off the key, it shuts that off. So there is real value in having a Benevolent Geist in play, I would say. I feel like I've kind of fallen behind at this point. It's perhaps not hopeless, though. I don't know that I probably don't want to draw any of these cards again. I guess I should. One other card that the Benevolent Geist stops is Dwar Disruption. So let's cast this first. And then my Witness the Future won't be able to be just Dwar Disruption. Good shuffle. What do they got down here? Could shuffle Fateful Absence back into their deck and despark. Yeah, let's do that. Because I don't want to shuffle any of my stuff back into the deck. Those are pretty bad draws for them, I would say, at this point. Also, they're a Leer deck, and I just got two of the better cards to recast with... Well, two cards you can recast with Leer are out of their graveyard. Huh. All right. Benevolent Geist doesn't stop that. I definitely don't want to put Discover the Formula back in their deck, because that would be a disaster if they drew it again. I'm gonna shuffle the Divide by Zero back into their deck, given the opportunity to do so. Start by attacking. Let's see if they're gonna let me Skyclave Apparition their Key to the Archive. This is a little bit scary because if they bounce the Skyclave Apparition later on, they're gonna have a 4/4. I do have Fateful Absence in my hand. But giving them a free 4/4 would not be ideal. I'm not realizing that they could have had Hullbreaker Horror in their hand, and I should have done that pre-combat. They didn't even float mana, so I would say they probably don't have Hullbreaker Horror in their hand. That is a spot where they actually could have, just by floating mana, they would have affected my play. Because I probably wouldn't have tapped out, so I couldn't cast Fateful Absence if they had 2 mana in their pool. Okay, are they actually going to counter this? It's a pretty good counter. So I'm left to win the game with this motley assortment of beatdown creatures and 1 Hullbreaker Horror and however many copies of Hall of Storm Giants I have. Certainly doable. 5/0 was a great draw. I'm not going to crack this right away. It would put a third card in my hand, and if I don't make a land drop, then their teachings would be more likely to be online. I'll crack it at the end of the turn. Their own Professor of Symbology. I definitely do not want the Professor of Symbology to trade with Skyclave Apparition. So I will not be attacking with the Skyclave Apparition anymore. That's awkward because that stops the Mascot Exhibition. Need to find something. Those two kind of count as something. It's a Hermit on Hermit face-off. I think I can afford to attack with everything. I would very much like my Hermit to trade here so I can play it as a Benevolent Geist so that their Hermits will no longer stop me from being able to cast spells. But the opponent seems wise to that plan. Is it worth just jamming my Discover into their Hermit? I do not think so. Skyclave Apparition's a nice answer to the Hermit. They have 10 lands in play, so this Hermit's really not countering anything. It's just making it so that they have to either leave up Hall of Storm Giants or they take a little damage. Let's see what Clone Crafter's got for me. A Hullbreaker Horror of my own. That's nice. I'm going to feel kind of silly if I get Jwari Disruptioned. That doesn't bother me nearly as much. So they've used 2 Divides, 2 Fateful Absences. This Hullbreaker Horror could potentially just survive. think I'm just going to pass and try to use the horror in combat potentially. If they have a divide, it's pretty bad for me no matter what I do. If they have a Fateful Absence, it's a little bit worse that I started with the Hullbreaker Horror. But if they have a card like Test of Talents in their hand, which they've demonstrated that they have in their sideboard, and I try to discover, it's really bad for me just because I spent 6 mana on something that gets countered. If I play the key, I just don't think I spend enough mana that turn. They've really discovered the formula a lot this game. I think that's the 3rd copy they've resolved. If we wind up just kind of in a standoff, I can start using the Hullbreaker Horror to bounce Clone Crafters, and I think they'll be defeated in pretty short order. But if they either get their own Hullbreaker Horror at the play, or they get Lear would end the game too. I'm just a little bit too far behind on resources. Okay. It's not that bad for me. They don't even have Vigilance, so I think that, yeah, they can't even really attack with much else. Please let me untap with Hullbreaker Horror. It wouldn't really make a ton of sense to, if they have a card that can get the Hullbreaker Horror off the board, to not just play it and also attack with 4/4. They have a Lear. Well, I guess they want to protect their Lear. Potentially. My Malevolent Hermit doesn't allow me to counter spells for 2 reasons, the Geist and the Lear. Uh-oh. This works against everything but Lear. Yeah, let's just concede this one. That was 100% just about falling behind on mana. All right. It's a very reasonable hand. I am almost definitely going to have to pay 3 life from the Seagate Restoration. It's certainly worth paying 3 life in this matchup to guarantee I play a 2-drop. I'll lead on this one just because it hits harder. Obviously going to play this. The question is, which land do I play? And I think the answer is just Hall of Storm Giants. I think that there's not really anything I'm likely to want to counter that they would play on turn 3 with the Malevolent Hermit. And I want to not have to worry about putting a tapped land into play on the subsequent turn. See what they do about this Benevolent Geist. It's like my guys were never even here to begin with. It's not that bad for me. I've made all my land drops. My turn is just going to be divide by 0. Or not divide by 0, discover the formula. What else could I do? I could play Geistchanneler, divide, hold up, negate. I have to use my cost reduction from the Geistchanneler to do that. It doesn't seem all that appealing. Let's just do this. I think the worst case is they just play their own discover. So their hand is cards that are better than regrowth. It certainly seems plausible. They can no longer afford to play Discover the Formula, though. Unless their hand is land Discover the Formula. Let's just take the Teferi off the board.
This is hardly my worst defeat.
I guess pass after that. I have the 2 clues I can use my mana to crack, and in order to fight through the Malevolent Hermit, I might need to play Divide by 0 and Negate, or Fateful Absence and Divide by 0, depending on what card they have in their hand. And we know that it's a good card, because it's a card they kept in their hand over Regrowth, the turn they resolved the Key to the Archive. These are still not the lands I'm looking for. Once I cracked the first clue, I really couldn't afford to fight over that. But I think that's fine. I'm just gonna take out the Hermit this time. Just let them have the key. Guess I'll kill that now. Getting close to the point where the Hall of Storm Giants is just going to make it impossible for them to win. Because if they have to fight through Negate and Disdainful Stroke, it's going to be pretty hard for them to have enough mana left over to deal with me attacking for 7 and these other creatures adding up to lethal. It's not impossible with the cost reductions, but it's certainly hard. I guess if they have Fateful Absence, they could just get rid of this, get a 4/4, and then that's something. Regrowth Leer. So they need their card to be Fateful Absence. What, if anything, can I do about that? Not that much, but they have 2 Fateful Absences. I don't have any more Divide by Zeros left in my deck. I do have another Disdainful Stroke. Let's tutor for the Disdainful Stroke. Let's discover the formula. Fateful Absence of my own. It's pretty good. I think if they play a Fateful Absence here, oh, they didn't even have one. I probably could have killed them then. I was going to say, if they played a Fateful Absence on this, I would think I would have Fateful Absence the token. Just to keep my clock. Discover the Formula is really the card that makes it so that the person who spends more mana usually wins. Because what usually happens in these games is one person plays Discover the Formula first, and then they're just ahead. And from that point, the other person, it's really a struggle to catch back up once you get behind to Discover the Formula, because once that's resolved, it means that they had a window to, resolve a 6-mana spell, which is obviously doesn't always happen, but when it happens, you're usually already a little bit ahead, and it causes the game to snowball out of control pretty ridiculously. All right, so they finally have their Leer in play. I think the best thing they've got from the Leer, though, is just a single Fateful Absence, which I think I'll beat pretty easily. So I think they need to Fateful Absence this Skyclave Apparition right now. They think differently. I guess from their perspective, they don't know I have this land, so that might have been their hope. Actually, I had a discounted Fateful Absence. That wasn't even a hope. I think that they just couldn't beat the Leer, no matter what they did. All right, there we go. We got to see the Clone Crafters in action. It performed kind of better than I was expecting. I'm still not sold that it's better than just building the more creature-light version. But maybe there'll be shakeups in Alchemy coming this week, and things will swing more in the direction of Clone Crafters. That's going to be it for me for now. I'm really looking forward to the changes that should be coming to Alchemy in the coming week, and once those changes come out, I'll definitely make a video talking about my initial impressions of them, and then I'll make a bunch of new deck tech videos talking about new things that I think are good or new things that I want to try. So please sub to the channel if you haven't already, and that way you'll get notified when those videos go live. And I'll see you then.